You've done it in a group conversation. Someone said something you disagreed with, and instead of letting it pass, you corrected them. Not aggressively, you were polite about it. But the room went quiet for half a second too long, and you felt the temperature change. The person you corrected smiled and moved on, but later they brought up something about you to someone else. A small detail that made you look careless or uninformed, and you couldn't prove it was retaliation because it never looked like retaliation. It looked like a casual observation, and that's the moment most people learn or fail to learn, that what you do in public is never just what you do. It's what you give other people to use. The first thing you should never do in public is explain yourself when you haven't been asked. The moment you start justifying a decision you've already made, you've handed the room a signal that you're uncertain about it. People don't listen to explanations. They listen for confidence. When you walk into a situation and announce your reasoning before anyone has challenged it, what the room hears isn't logic. It hears a person who needs permission, a person who's already imagining the objection and trying to get ahead of it. Machiavelli understood that perception is built not by what you say, but by what you seem to need. The person who explains too much seems like they need approval. The person who acts without preamble seems like they've already decided, and people will always follow the one who's already decided, even if the decision is wrong. The second is reacting visibly when someone disrespects you. This one is almost impossible to control, which is exactly why it matters. When someone undermines you in front of others, your face moves before your brain does. You tighten your jaw, your eyes narrow, you shift your posture, and every person in the room clocks it. Not because they're watching for weakness, but because human beings are wired to detect threat responses in each other. The moment you visibly react, you've told the room that this person has access to your emotions, which means they have leverage. Machiavelli wrote extensively about the ruler who lets his enemies see what moves him, and his conclusion was always the same. The person who controls their visible response controls the narrative. Not the person who has the best argument, but the person who looks like none of it touched them. The third is showing hunger. Wanting something is human. Showing how badly you want it is a tactical disaster. When you walk into a negotiation, a job interview, a social situation, and people can feel your desperation, something shifts. They start treating you like someone who will take less, accept worse terms, tolerate disrespect, because walking away isn't really an option for you. Desire, when visible, becomes a leash, and the person on the other end of that leash doesn't even have to pull. They just have to wait, because they know you'll move toward them on your own. The most powerful position in any exchange is the one held by the person who could walk away and mean it, not perform it, mean it. The fourth is correcting someone publicly. This is the mistake from the opening, and most people make it thinking they're contributing to a conversation when they're actually starting a war they won't see the consequences of for weeks. Public correction feels like honesty. It functions as humiliation, and the person you humiliated doesn't forget. They just wait. Machiavelli would say that of all the injuries you can inflict, the ones done to someone's image in front of others are the ones that generate the most patient and creative retaliation. You will never see it coming because it won't look like revenge. It will look like an offhand comment, a piece of information shared at the wrong time, a slight recalibration of how people perceive you that traces back to a moment you barely remember. The fifth is talking about your plans before they're finished. There's a specific chemical reward your brain gives you when you tell people what you're about to do. It mimics the feeling of having already done it, which is exactly the problem. The public announcement satisfies the craving for recognition before the work has earned any. But beyond the motivational cost, there's a strategic one. When people know what you're building before it's built, they have time to position themselves around it. Some will copy it. Some will undermine it. Some will simply watch and wait for you to fail, so they can reference it later as evidence that your ambitions outpace your ability. Machiavelli would say that the wise man reveals his victories, never his campaigns, because a campaign invites interference, but a victory only invites respect. The sixth is being visibly emotional about something that hasn't happened yet. Worrying out loud, catastrophizing in conversation, expressing fear about a future that hasn't arrived. This one seems harmless, and it's devastating. When you externalize your anxiety in a public setting, you're not processing, you're broadcasting. And the people receiving that broadcast don't hear a person being vulnerable. They hear a person who can't handle pressure. Right or wrong, that's the interpretation. Emotional regulation in public isn't about suppression. It's about understanding that the room will judge your competence based on your composure. And no amount of vulnerability rhetoric will change that calculus in competitive environments. The seventh is apologizing when you've done nothing wrong. This is the one most people will fight me on, because we've been trained to believe that apologizing is always a sign of emotional maturity. And in private, between people who trust each other, it often is. But in public, an unnecessary apology functions as a confession. When you say sorry for something that wasn't your fault, the room doesn't hear grace. It hears guilt. It recodes the situation so that you become the person who caused the problem, regardless of what actually happened. Machiavelli would call this voluntary submission, and he'd argue that it invites further encroachment because you've just established that you will absorb blame to keep the peace, which tells every opportunist in the room exactly how to handle you going forward. None of this is about becoming cold or calculated or performing some version of dominance that requires you to suppress who you are. It's about recognizing that public spaces operate on a different set of rules than private ones, and the people who thrive in those spaces are the ones who understand the difference. You can be warm in private and strategic in public. You can be honest with the people you trust and measured with the people you don't yet know. Machiavelli's entire body of work is built on one observation that most people resist because it sounds cynical, but functions as protection. People respond to what they see, not what you intend. And what they see is always, without exception, shaped by the signals you give them, without realizing you're giving them. Every public interaction you've ever had has been a performance, whether you designed it that way or not. The only question is whether you're performing on purpose or by accident. The person who acts without awareness of how they're being perceived isn't being authentic, they're being careless. And the cost of that carelessness is almost never immediate. It shows up weeks or months later in the opportunity that didn't materialize, the invitation that never came, the relationship that shifted without explanation. You won't connect the dots because the dots were laid too far apart. But they were laid, and they were laid in public by you in a moment you thought didn't matter.